I am loving all the familiar faces. Thank you so much for coming to Crypto Cafe this week. It's been a lot of fun. Yesterday we had a great conversation with Robert Adams with Powa about blockchain technology and the auto industry. And today we're going to talk about dynamic equity on the blockchain. So this is going to be really great. We have our CEO, Rob Konsdorf from EOS Detroit, to explain a product that we're developing called Meringue. Tomorrow, we're going to have Token Economics. Our CTO, Charlie Dumont, is going to basically create a game for us so that it's physically interactive, so that we can really understand the economics of these digital assets, tokens, cryptocurrency. So please join us at Lear Innovation Center tomorrow at 5 o'clock. And it will be happy hour time as well, so you can have a glass of wine where you're playing the game. It should be a lot of fun. And I think that's it for our announcements. I'm going to hand it over to Rob.
Oh yeah, I've got a mic. Thanks, Ingrid. Appreciate that. Yeah, so welcome everybody. Today we're going to talk about something that has been sort of an invaluable tool in the EOS Detroit toolbox, and something that we used to start our company, and decided, hey, this is really useful for us. Perhaps it'll be useful for other people as well. So taking something that we're doing internally and turning it into a product that can be used by anyone who's starting a new venture. And so the title of this is Evolving Equity Allocation, and the topic is dynamic equity splitting, which is coming up with creative ways to actually allocate equity in a venture outside of the standard just sort of agreement that may occur when someone starts a company. Like, Dylan, you get 60%, I get 20, and so on and so forth. It's a negotiation. So with dynamic equity, we can actually change that from just a negotiation into actually a formula that's using measurable information to figure out how much each person who's contributing deserves. So thus getting us to a fair ownership split. So could you change the slide? Thanks. Yep, so sometimes hard work doesn't always pay off. You know, there's a lot of things. Not only are starting new ventures really risky, and you know, it's fragile, but when you do static equity splitting or traditional agreements about who owns what, it's impossible to really know how much future value everyone's going to create at that point when you start the venture. So it's sort of just a negotiation at that point. And you know, so this leads to the effect that people that are contributing a lot may not get as much as they deserve, or any. If the venture isn't actually doing some sort of ownership split, then the hard workers, you know, they're getting cash or something usually instead, which is fine, but I think that it's better to try to split or spread the equity out further. So in order to start our company, we actually decided to implement this model, and so we keep track of how much time people are putting into their week's work, and other things like how much are you worth on the market, what would your salary be somewhere else. You take all of these data points and put them into a formula, and then the formula determines our cap table, or who owns what part of the company dynamically. And we can go further into detail about how that works. So we are calling this product that we're creating Meringue. It's a software as a service. Welcome. No, you're good. Welcome. So anywho, the idea is, no, we can pause for a second, get set up here. Cool, thanks Ingrid. Awesome. No worries. Yep. Yep. So anywho, Meringue is creating this dynamic equity split software as a service. So subscription-based model. You can come sign up and plug this into your existing business or the new business you want to start, and it will automate the tracking of all of this different information. And so the idea is, rather than founders having to worry about yet another thing about how is this going to be split up, how is this going to be figured out, that answer gets deferred and is based off of real information. So it's based off of how much time did you put in, how much cash did you put in, that's another metric. And basically all of that's aggregated into a formula, and that determines who owns how much of the venture. Yep, and this is Dylan's concept for the brand, meringue being the pie topping on like lemon meringue pie. And so we're working through that and also working through building the initial system right now. The timeline we'll discuss a little later. Oh, did you want to take a picture? Okay. Yeah, there we go. We got plenty of time. I'm probably going to finish a little early today. And if anyone has any questions or want any clarifying points as we go, please feel free to raise your hand or ask. Yeah, so the whole point here is to create a way to split a company up or any ownership in a venture in a fair way that's based off of an auditable record of events. The events being the different contributions. So, you know, when we come together and decide what we're going to get done for the next couple weeks at EOS Detroit, everyone kind of says, well, I can put in 3 days or I can put in 7 days. And then we use that information in order to assign out work. And then if you do 7 days worth of work, you get 7 days worth of ownership, basically. So based on contributions, not based on a negotiation, this produces a record. This is a natural fit for a blockchain application because all of these records can be put into this space that's got higher assurances around data, inside of a blockchain. And so we don't really focus on the blockchain aspect of this when we're talking about the product, but we can easily make this better by putting it on a blockchain. So the last bit here being the management or whoever's leading the team can still manage this model and sort of correct things if some information gets put in wrong. So there's ways to make sure that we can manually continue to maintain a high accuracy with it. Could you change? Thanks. So the idea behind this is how do we automate this? Because it sounds like this is a lot of information we have to now start tracking. That's the hard problem that we're looking to solve by connecting directly into your business systems. So if you're using a project tracking system, if you're using expense reporting systems, time tracking systems, there's a various number of business systems people use in order to sort of manage their company's operations and workflow. We want to sit in the middle of that and figure out how to intelligently represent that data as contributions. So that's sort of the question mark part. We haven't actually gotten to building out these integrations yet, but there's definitely a path through this. And that's the sort of magic here is when we get this product right, it'll just sort of be invisible in the background. It'll be doing its job. People can go look at where they stand at any time and how much ownership they have in a pie, but it's not going to be getting in everyone's way, which is the goal we're after. Could you change it? Thanks. And so, yeah, the idea is like this is another tool that people who are would-be entrepreneurs can use to bootstrap their company. So Yeah, the contributors can go view the pie. You know, maybe you'll do that once in a while. We could send out an automated email every few weeks to just tell you where you stand even, if you opt into that feature. And there's also additional protections here for the business and the individual. And so what I haven't mentioned is that we're using the software system to automate tracking the ownership, but there's still legal contracts that have to be put in place too. So that's the interface with the company. The way we have it set up is you've just got a pool of equity that's being shared across the whole team. And then later on, when the pie freezes, which is based off a number of different events that could occur, and these are custom, you can set those up, like once our company's profitable for X number of quarters, or if the board votes to freeze it, or there's a number of different ways, freezing triggers basically. But before that happens, we sort of still need rules and structure around how this thing's going to manage. And so there's ways for individuals to be protected if the company does something to sort of mess them over, or vice versa, which happens inevitably in businesses. So that's factored in as well. Could you switch it? Thanks, Dylan. And yeah, this is applicable to any new business. It's applicable to token distributions. For the blockchain heads in the room, you can actually divvy up, you know, say you're starting your own project and you have some distribution that you want to give out to people who help. You can use this system in order to accomplish that. And again, ownership's based on measurable results here. So we actually did this for a blockchain project last fall called Telos, which Adam talked about a little bit yesterday in his talk at Lear. And if you switch the slide, you'll see the system that we built. So this had 69 people splitting a pie based on their contributions in this just really sort of basic web application we created as an alpha test. And this is sort of the idea of what you might see if you were to log in and be in one of these pies in a new venture. Is, you know, kind of where everyone stands, and there's other features that can be built in. We actually threw this code out. It was just meant for a test, really, to sort of validate the idea. So Meringue will be based off of some different code. Yep, that's fine. You can switch it. Thanks. Yeah, and the timeline to get this out, we're targeting the end of the year for the beta. As I said, the second half of last year, we actually did the alpha test on Telos just to sort of start thinking about solving this problem. We've written a spec, which is sort of the blueprints for writing the software. And we're building out some base application scaffolding right now, which is just sort of the structure of the application. And going into the fall, we'll actually be building out all the Meringue-specific functionality just to get to the first version, because software is never actually done. There's just always a new version coming. So as we get going, we're looking for people who are interested in beta testing. So if this sounds like something you'd be interested in using for starting your own thing, we'd love to talk to you and get you on our beta list so we can have more feedback, because really that's another thing about building good software is we really want to get feedback from people who see that this might be useful for them, so we know we're solving the right problems. So if you know anyone who's starting up or would want to use a system like this, we'd love to get in contact with you. That's actually all I had. It's a quick talk. The system isn't built entirely yet, so I can't do a live demo or anything, but if there's any questions about this or any clarification points, we've got plenty of time. Adam?
Once I
Oh yeah, that is internationalization. So what internationalization is creating a multilingual experience. So one of the things we decided to do right out of the gate with our software stack or the technology we're using is make it multilingual so that we can serve people in all over the world in all kinds of different cultures. And that's important for some of the other projects we're working on as well that Ingrid's leading up, one called Detroit. So, there's so many languages in the world, so it's kind of a hairy problem to bake that into your software. So if you do it from the outset, it makes things a lot easier down the road to just support that multilingual experience. Good question, thanks. Did you have one, Eric? Yeah. Hey.
I know this is probably your favorite question, but does it have to be like a blockchain application? Like,
No, not at all. That's a
where's the actual value from adding it?
mhm. That's a great question. So because it doesn't have to be a blockchain application, we're actually not building the first version fully integrated into a blockchain, because that actually creates friction for onboarding, because it's still complicated to get into the cryptocurrency space kind of right now. So we want this to be more accessible and usable for anyone who just wants to use this as a business function. And we'll actually create integrations into blockchains. So it could be an option that you could actually publish your contribution log to a blockchain, but it won't be a requirement. And maybe down the road, as things evolve, if every app we're using 5 or 10 years from now is built into these blockchains, maybe it'll just be full blockchain app. But it's more about the assurances you get, like the auditability guarantees and the transparency guarantees you get from a blockchain. It's a perfect fit for this, because at the end of one of these pies, when it gets frozen, we've got a log of contributions that explains exactly why the company is being split a certain way. So putting that information into a space that it can't be tampered with gives us a higher guarantee that everything's going right and accurately. Thanks for the question.
So what are some of the reasons that you freeze your pie?
Sure. Great question. What are some pie triggers? So it's kind of custom. This goes back to when you implement the legal contracts in order to set this up. You can kind of specify what you want. Now, we're a radical transparency company, so I don't mind telling anyone about how we're set up ourselves. I think EOS Detroit has, if we're profitable for 4 consecutive quarters, it freezes. If we hit a certain dollar amount, which I can't remember, like if we have $2 million in the bank or something like that. So it's sort of like these goals that your company's taking off. You eventually freeze it, and the idea is it sort of freezes itself over time, because if my fair market value, let's just say my fair market value is $60,000 a year for my salary. Well, at first, when the company can't pay anything, I just get $60,000 worth of slices in the equity model. But as the company becomes able to kind of cover its costs over time, it can start paying cash out to the people. So maybe I get $30,000 a year in cash and $30,000 a year in equity, like after a couple of years. And then eventually, once the company's taking off, it can just pay everyone in cash. So it's sort of it just starts to freeze by itself, because less and less slices get allocated over time. And so when that starts to happen, it's pretty clear that it's not going to move much at all anymore. And so you can freeze it, and when you freeze it, that pool of equity gets kind of split out to all of the people who are in the model, and then it's real company equity. So while it slices, it's all locked up in a pool, in a vesting pool, and then it gets split out after the freeze, and then everyone's kind of got the same protections that any shareholder would have. Hey.
Question
great question. What kind of challenges? Well, in the alpha testing phase, so we were running this for an open source project with people in probably 15 different countries, different time zones, you know, and there was about 69 people, I think, that participated. And what we did, we didn't have all the automated business integrations built out, so it was very reporting intensive because everyone had to come report all the work they were doing. And it was really hard to cross-check because we didn't have good standards in place. So what we saw was everyone was tracking their time differently, which meant some people were, if you were working faster, you were getting less. So there's these little games that people were picking up on, and then we saw people trying to get more by playing the game, basically, because they had an incentive to try to game it. So it got pretty messy, and you know, we didn't have an optimal split on Telos, but we learned a lot, and it was good enough. I mean, it was sort of like, at the end of the day, I blame myself because I was managing it, and you know, it just sort of got out of control a little. But everyone sort of moved on, and everyone got something. It was just sort of, there were some certain arbitrary things. So for instance, one of the things that you can do is set up some commission structure, because certain types of jobs are kind of more natural to having commission, right? So what happened in Telos was there was a bunch of arbitrary commissions created by one of the working groups about, like, if you were the first to get some sort of partner to join or something, then you got an arbitrary number of slices. And those, I say arbitrary because those numbers were invented. And so that really affected the model a lot, and the people who were only putting time in were getting disenfranchised because people who were going after the commissions were making way more, like a week's worth of labor in like a way shorter time. And so being really careful about commissions is important. That's why I didn't even bring it up. We're not even going to encourage that a whole lot until we can study it more and figure out how to get the numbers right and maybe suggest sane defaults. As far as future problems go, integrating into the third-party systems is a lot of work. There's like a ton of, there's 100 different systems we can pick. So it's like, how do we prioritize which systems to integrate first? How do we make sure that it's easy enough for the customers to plug this in and it just works, which may involve us having to say, like, well, Meringue expects this format for your information, so that might impose some rigidity on the company, and a lot of that's going to just be experimentation to sort of figure out what works the best, and a lot of trial and error. Thanks for the question. Oh, sure.
Do you have any suggestions on how I can get more information on cryptocurrency?
Oh, totally. Yeah. Yeah, so suggestions on where to learn about cryptocurrency. Actually, Phil back here gave a talk on Monday, and that talk was filmed. It was a great starter for as far as how to learn about EOS. But what I did want to point out was there's a website called Coinbase.com, and you could go watch videos on there to learn about cryptocurrency and earn cryptocurrency. So if you go to coinbase.com/earn, you'll be able to actually watch a few videos, 2 to 4 minutes, and then you can get $10 in EOS for free and have learned something from those videos. So that's a really good place to start. And beyond that, we have meetups like this often, at least once a month usually, and then we film all of that and put it on YouTube. So you could come to our YouTube channel and start listening through some of the older talks we did to sort of have a basis to start on as well. Yep, the YouTube channel, I actually should have put it up here. Sorry about that. It's just youtube.com/EOS Detroit. Yep.
If you sign our mailing list in the back, then we can let you know when we have Blockchain 101 workshops and all kinds of, so we go through the whole range of experience in blockchain.
Yep. Ingrid's been working on a curriculum, so we really do want to make it, front and center. We need a lot of learning materials around this stuff because it's complicated and it's, the bleeding edge of technology. So,
And a shout out to Crypto Blood.
yeah, exactly.
If you watch his videos, you would learn a lot as well.
Mm-hmm.
You learn about a lot of the players working in the industry.
Yep, Crypto Blood. You've been doing your podcast or your video cast for what, years?
2 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's more news, industry, news, and stuff like that.
Yeah. Tons of great resources there just as jumping off points.
Yeah.
How's it going?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
I know you have this as a business model
Mhm.
right now for a company. Have you ever considered creating one that's for an educational base?
Yeah, that's a great question.
I asked that question, like, for example, I'm an administrator,
Mhm.
and the first thought that came to, I'm always gonna think on the education side, because I just do a lot of consulting in education.
Mhm.
But the first thing that came to my mind is, first of all, starting with the superintendent, them determining grant money to come into the school,
Mhm.
they put certain programs out, how they give the money based on who's using the product or how much time it's spent. So that was
Right.
the first thought that came to my mind, and how this would be dynamic with that distribution,
Like dynamic budgeting almost. Yeah, I love it. That's
Sign me up. Let me get a favor. Part of this. So
Yeah.
I can we can put, yeah.
I think you could definitely do that, and that's a great feature suggestion for us to build in later. Because it doesn't have to just be equity we're representing. It could be budgets. It could be. I've even had bands say they wanted to represent the ownership of their band. So anything that you want to sort of split, you could figure out some way to map this idea in, I think.
Okay, now my next goal.
Yeah, shoot.
Okay, so my next question is, what would be like a cost base for something like this? Because again, I'm thinking school-based and
Mhm.
bringing it in that environment,
Mhm.
as well. I mean, it could be used in the exact same format when it comes to grant funding and all of that.
Mhm.
But I'm just thinking also on the school-based side, if I'm a tech person, if I have to bring this technology down from the district office into the school,
Mhm.
how can I get my marketing teacher to, teach something like this and integrate this where within their classroom, each kid, they can group the kids and they can create their own company and learn about the distribution and tie in that regard. So
Yeah.
what would be the cost factor in getting them access to
Sure.
something of this nature?
Great question. So we haven't actually figured out what the subscription model would look like, but what comes to mind kind of intuitively is paying a monthly subscription for access or for per pie. And sometimes businesses do per user. So if you had 10 people you wanted to use it, and maybe we would say it's $3 a month per person. So then it'd be $30 a month kind of recurring fee. That would sort of be what it would look like. So a subscription model where it's ongoing, but there's different ways. They call that the software as a service model, and there's different ways that some offerings actually provide free tiers as well, or even some offerings for like educational nonprofit stuff that are priced differently from commercial stuff. So those are definitely things we could think about offering. And yeah, a free tier so people can play with it and learn about it. And then if they want to really get serious about it and open up more of the features, they can start paying, kind of thing. What's up, Brian?
You were talking about some issues
Mhm.
So if you work for 8 hours and get this commission may be worth more.
Mhm.
So if I were to work for 2 hours and get 4 commissions, and another person works for 10 hours and didn't get the mixed commission, you have something baked in to kind of switch the weight of the value.
Mhm.
Different things in the, just to make sure. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Depending on what
So
it is.
that may.
Just like what she was saying, say if you had different programs,
Mhm.
the band does things to bring in more income, maybe they get more like a pie because there's things.
Right. Because it's like a lawyer's time is worth, or a doctor's time is worth more per hour than other jobs. So yeah, agreed. That's part of the model. They call that the fair market value, which is one of the things that goes into the formula. And I don't think commission structures are inherently bad. You're totally right. Like that kind of builds in the right incentive for people to actually, drive value instead of just punch the clock. It was just coming to the numbers about what the commissions should be. That was where we invented them out of the thin air on Telos. But if you actually had like a compensation analysis, or you mapped in like some existing commission structure that made sense into that, then it'd be more grounded in some reality probably, as opposed to just these numbers that got invented. So that's kind of where that loophole came in on Telos. Cool. Hey, how's it going?
My name's Brian. It's my first time. It's all pretty new.
Cool. Welcome.
How would somebody accrue equity or Meringue,
Mhm.
if they were making money like it? So I graduated with a nutrition degree.
Mhm.
In fact, made a website called the Nutrition Dictionary, and I make videos and for each, really all of that and all that.
Mhm.
You guys reward, third-party people like that if they have a very popular website. I could accrue Meringue. I don't have a business. I don't have. It's not a family or
Mhm.
anything. How would people like that, like YouTubers who make videos, relate to
Mhm.
any of this?
That's a great question. So another potential feature that might offer sort of what you're talking about would be some sort of creating pies that are profit shares. Not necessarily equity, because you can share profits without having to actually assign the ownership rights that equity comes with, which is voting rights in the company and things like that. And there's a book that I read last year called the Slicing Pie Handbook. And slicing pie is the actual model, like the formula that we're using. And he goes into how that's almost preferred versus doing the equity split, doing just a profit share using the pie. So that's kind of already defined. And so it would come down to, let's say it's a YouTuber. I don't know what their profit sharing business model would look like, but maybe if someone refers subscriptions to their channel, then they have some sort of referral system. I don't even know if that's legal to do on Google. They might say you can't do that type of thing, but that would be kind of an example. So yeah, basically figuring out how these pies can be used for measuring other things other than just equity. Equity and token distribution is sort of the first use case we're after right now, but it could certainly be expanded as this young lady in front, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, was talking about the grant funding. Yeah. Gwen, cool, nice to meet you. So yeah, I mean, join the beta. Help us. If you got good feature suggestions, we can try to build them in. Awesome. So thank you all for coming. If there's any more questions, I can take any final questions, or we can call it. So thank you very much. Oh, one more? Oh, great question. Yeah. Why did we go with EOS instead of Ethereum? It's a really good question. So there's a number of different factors. I don't know how much this is going to go over. This is going to get a little technical and a little bit blockchain specific right now. And if you have any questions about that, we can talk about it. So Ethereum was launched in 2015, and it's a smart contract platform, which means you can write your own programs on it and sort of run programs in this decentralized way. It has had its own challenges with building apps right now in its current form. It's expensive to run an app on Ethereum because you have to pay something called gas, which is transaction fees. And there's only so much throughput that you can put through the Ethereum blockchain, so it kind of inhibits any sort of real-time application. So EOS has got a different model and resource model, and it's designed to sort of maximize performance while still maintaining high assurances around the immutability of the blockchain. So that's one of the main things blockchains can give us is assurances that this record can't be tampered with. So EOS came out last year, so 3 years later than Ethereum, but is actually based on technology that was being developed in 2014 on a platform called BitShares. So I got involved with that community and sort of followed that technology along and sort of paid more attention to it than I did Ethereum. And that's why I'm more of an expert in that. But EOS sort of took a longer time to come out to market, but designed in a way to make it more economically viable to develop your applications on it faster so that you can run real-time applications. And it has different trade-offs. So the programs on EOS, or the smart contracts, are written in C++, which is a known language. It's been around for decades. And whereas with Ethereum, you have to learn a new language that's invented for it called Solidity. So that's another thing. EOS is kind of developed to be easier for developers. So the idea is to make it less of a leap for someone who's an existing developer to be able to come in and start playing with blockchain stuff easier, because Ethereum's pretty technically complicated to build stuff on. So that's not to say Ethereum won't become better once it gets upgraded. It might take another year or two, and EOS is already here today. So we want to just get going, and yeah, it's a great question. It's sort of like a whole other path of like the blockchain industry that's not as well known as Ethereum in the West. Actually, though, in the East, especially in China, EOS is bigger than Ethereum. So it's kind of interesting how it flip-flops when you're on the other side of the earth, you know. But yeah, so I hope that answered your question. Sure. Yep. What's up, Brian?
I just wanted to mention that not only are E-Ray and Rob EOS board members, Bill and I are also, we've all read Classic High, we all are participating in this model. So if you have questions about it, we'll have 2 more minutes, so please feel free to ask some questions about Meringue.
Yeah. Yeah. Nobody has complained about it yet, so that's good. We're all in agreement. It's working. It's fair. We're still building it, so it's kind of like assembling an engine while you're driving the car down the street. But we're hoping to sort out all the messy stuff so anyone who wants to pick up and run with it can do it much easier going forward. Thank you, everyone, for coming.